Penguin Island, just south of Perth, has ended in tragedy.
If penguins move to find new ice, they may start going to these new colonies, so we need to know where they're going to move to.
More than 200 years ago, in the rough waters of the Southern Ocean, Macquarie Island began to die. Rats, rabbits, and cats crept into penguin colonies that had never known fear. It started quietly. A missing chick here, a patch of broken ground there. But what followed was a chain reaction so brutal that scientists would later call it one of the most haunting island disasters ever recorded. The island that never knew fear. Macquarie Island sits alone in the Southern Ocean, a long, narrow green ridge hammered by roaring winds and cold gray swells. On a map, it looks tiny, but its story is anything but small. The island stretches about 21 miles long and roughly 3.5 miles wide, sitting about 930 miles southeast of Tasmania and halfway to Antarctica. It's one of those rare places that feels both empty and alive, a strip of rock and grass surrounded by endless ocean. This is the only spot on Earth where pieces of the deep ocean crust and even part of the upper mantle have been pushed all the way above sea level, a literal cross-section of the seafloor sitting in the open air. The coast is rough and beautiful, mostly cliffs and long shelves carved flat by waves. As you climb inland, the ground softens into a soggy patchwork of meadows, mossy bogs, and something locals call feather beds, where every step sinks and bounces underfoot. Between those bogs rise tall grasses and two massive leafy plants that look like something out of prehistory. They're called megaherbs, the Macquarie Island cabbage, with huge green plates for leaves, and the silver-leafed Pleurophyllum hookery, shimmering like metal in the wind. In this cold, storm-soaked world, these plants grow big to grab as much light as they can. They huddle together across the higher grasslands, especially in thick stands of poa tussock, their leaves shaking like umbrellas in the gale. Before people ever set foot here,
researchers are celebrating an extraordinary transformation of the local environment.
Macquarie belonged entirely to birds. Every slope, every beach, every ledge was theirs. Royal penguins, with their golden crests and white faces, live nowhere else on Earth, only here and on the tiny Bishop and Clerk islets off the southern tip. Their colonies aren't measured in dozens or hundreds. They stretch for miles. The single largest one, near Herd Point, holds around 500,000 breeding pairs. In the mid-1980s, a full island census estimated roughly 849,000 pairs in total. You don't just see them, you feel them. The sound hits first, a low rolling chorus that never stops. Then the smell of salt and guano, the shimmer of movement as dense crowds pack the beaches and slopes, and long lines of penguins waddling in columns to and from the sea, like tiny commuters on a daily shift change. King penguins claim their own kingdom on the eastern shore, especially at Lusitania Bay, one of the most famous breeding beaches on Earth. Here, hundreds of thousands of silver-backed birds crowd the dark volcanic sand in a living mosaic of orange throats and shimmering gray feathers. Around the year 2000, scientists estimated that the colony alone held roughly 150,000 to 170,000 breeding pairs, adding up to nearly 500,000 across the island and its region. And sharing that shoreline are the island's heavyweights, the southern elephant seals. They haul out of the surf in the tens of thousands. They come here to rest, to molt, to pup, and to breed. Government surveys estimate about 70,000 elephant seals use Macquarie, making it one of the largest herds on the planet. Once the sun dips and the beaches are quiet, a different shift begins. The night sky fills with petrels. They spend their days far out at sea and return only under the cover of darkness. White-headed petrels, blue petrels, prions, sooty shearwaters, gray petrels, and diving petrels all tunnel into the island's soft, peaty soil, nesting under the thick tussock grass. For thousands of years, they were perfectly safe. No animal on land could dig fast enough or far enough to reach them. That peace shaped everything here. The birds, the plants, even the soil lived without fear of claws or teeth. Biologists call that naive prey, life that's never had to learn what danger looks like. And for Macquarie, that innocence would soon become its curse. The first people arrived in 1810. A sealer named Frederick Hasselborough sighted the island, and before long, the quiet beaches filled with smoke and noise. Rough huts, boiling pots for oil.
Some of Australia's most elite athletes are undergoing tests in a specially built MRI machine.
And makeshift camps set up wherever small boats could land. For the next century, men came and went with the seasons, chasing skins and blubber. They left behind gear, barrels, and stores of food, and hidden among them, stowaways. Rats and mice ride anywhere a ship goes. They hide in sacks, scurry between planks, and survive weeks at sea. When supplies were dropped ashore and the weather turned bad, the rodents stayed behind. That's how a place that had never known a land mammal ended up with 2 of them. By the 1890s, both black rats and house mice were firmly settled. For them, this was paradise. Eggs, chicks, seeds, insects, everything was food, and nothing hunted them. The burrow-nesting petrels that once slipped home unseen now faced fast, sharp-toothed predators that could sniff out their nests and chew straight through the turf. Mice took a smaller, but no less damaging route, eating worms, beetles, and larvae, the invertebrates that kept the soil healthy by breaking down dead plants. It was an invisible kind of destruction. The cleanup crew of the island slowly erased. The birds didn't understand what was happening. The plants couldn't fight back. Macquarie had become a feast with no balance, and the newcomers had it all to themselves. The settlers tried to solve the problem in the way people once thought best, by adding something bigger. Cats were introduced in the 19th century to keep the rodents in check and protect the food stores. It sounded clever. But on an island filled with fearless birds that had never learned to run, it became a massacre. The cats didn't stop at rats or mice. They hunted anything that moved. At night, in the fog, they prowled the grasslands and cliffs, taking adult birds, chicks, even petrels that came home to burrow. At their worst, they were estimated to kill about 60,000 seabirds every year. The damage went far beyond numbers. Whole colonies vanished. Burrows that had been used for generations went empty. By the time conservation teams finally removed the cats decades later, the loss was already deep and permanent. But cats weren't the only invaders brought by human hands. In the 1870s, crews released another bird, the weka, a flightless rail from New Zealand. Weka were carried as live food supplies for sealing ships, a walking larder meant to feed stranded crews. Records show they were set loose in 1874, and again in 1879. On Macquarie, they thrived, just as they had on so many islands before. They stalked the grass, probing the peat for eggs and chicks, sometimes digging right into petrel burrows. Rabbits were the final blow in the chain of newcomers that reached the island in the 19th century.
Rabbits on the heritage-listed island are causing soil erosion and destroying nesting areas for native birds.
Unlike the rats or cats that slipped ashore by accident, rabbits were brought here on purpose. They were released as a living food supply for shipwrecked sailors and for the small crews who came to work on the island, men who might be stuck for months with nothing else to eat if their stores ran out. One record pins their arrival to a shipment from New Zealand in 1879. In a world without foxes or stoats, they found the perfect home. The meadows were lush, the winters cold but not deadly, and the island's plants had never evolved with grazers like these. Seedlings vanished before they could root. The great megaherbs, once towering like green umbrellas, were stripped to bare stalks. Rabbits dug warrens deep into the hillsides, loosening the soil until rain washed it away. To anyone looking from the outside, it might have seemed like the plants were fragile. But they weren't weak. They were simply built for a different kind of world. On an island where nothing had ever eaten them, they'd never needed armor. No thorns, no poisons, no quick regrowth, nothing. For ground-nesting birds, it was death from every direction, teeth, claws, and beaks, where there had once been only wind. 2 small native species never made it through that century alive. The Macquarie Island parakeet, a bright green cyanoramphus parakeet that once darted through the tussock meadows, disappeared soon after rabbits and predators arrived. The last confirmed sightings were in the 1880s, and by 1891, it was gone. The Macquarie Island rail, a local subspecies of the buff-banded rail, met the same fate around the same time. It lived low in the grass, tied to the cover of dense tussock. When that cover vanished under rabbit grazing and cats and weka began hunting through it, the rail had nowhere left to hide. Today, what's left of them sits in museum drawers, skins and bones that tell the story of a quiet extinction. You could also see the damage right from the beach. On the eastern side of Macquarie Island, Lusitania Bay looks like a dark, stony bowl jammed with king penguins. But in the fall of 2006, that natural bowl turned on them. After years of rabbits chewing through the grass and stripping the slopes bare, the ground above the colony became thin and unstable. Then a storm rolled in. The rain hit hard, the soil let go, and mud came roaring down in sheets. This landslide at Lusitania Bay buried part of the penguin colony. The white dots of penguins below were sitting ducks beneath the raw slopes. That landslide wasn't some random act of nature. It was a warning, a sign that the island's hills were coming apart. Photos from that same year show 2 massive rabbit-triggered landslides and a long line of fresh cuts running along the coast. The pattern repeated itself again and again. The numbers behind that damage are staggering. Government assessments and later reports show rabbit populations in the hundreds of thousands during their worst peaks, with one historical high point reaching around 350,000 in the late 1970s. When managers checked again in the early 2000s, they described entire hillsides along the coast as denuded, meaning stripped to nothing but dirt and stone. And it wasn't just the rabbits. Their impact opened the door for everything else. With the grass gone, rats and mice spread even faster. During population peaks, some studies estimated tens of thousands of rats and roughly 100,000 mice across the island. Together, that was enough to raid burrows, eat chicks and eggs, and wipe out the insects and worms that kept the soil alive. By the time the hills started collapsing and the penguin rookeries were sliding into the sea, the message was undeniable. The only way forward was total eradication. How they saved a dying island. There was no halfway version of success.
For now, scientists are continuing to monitor the island's natural wonders.
Either everything went, or the years of erosion, landslides, and vanishing birds would never stop. The plan took years of arguing, testing, and waiting for funding to land. In the mid-2000s, that money came through. Just under 25 million Australian dollars. It was enough to build one single operation that hit all three pests together. Then came the question that made everyone pause. How do you pull off something that complex on a subantarctic rock hammered by wind and rain, where daylight fades early and cliffs run for miles? The logistics filled binders. Fuel caches had to be staged. Crews had to be trained to survive in freezing wet conditions. Helicopters had to be adapted for strong gusts and short flight windows. The planners even mapped out the best months when the fewest seabirds would be nesting on land, so they wouldn't kill more than they saved. One lucky break was already in their pocket. Feral cats, the island's earlier plague, had been completely eradicated by the year 2000. That meant the focus could stay on the remaining trio: rabbits, rats, and mice. The pests still chewing away at everything alive. Before committing to a full-scale run, the team ran a small pilot. In 2010, they baited a limited area, just enough to test methods. It didn't go perfectly. Some scavenging seabirds died after feeding on poisoned carcasses. The results stung, but they also clarified what had to change: timing, cleanup, and every detail that could cut the risk before the big rollout. In February 2011, the team released a virus, rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, or RHDV, a pathogen designed to kill rabbits and only rabbits. To carry it, they used chopped carrot baits dropped across the island. The virus spread fast in the cold, damp climate. Within weeks, the rabbit population collapsed. That success reduced how many carcasses would later be lying around for gulls and petrels to scavenge once poison baiting began. With rabbit numbers already down, the heavy phase could begin. The winter of 2011 was chosen for one key reason: most seabirds would be at sea. Pilots flew tight, overlapping grid lines, spreading cereal pellets laced with brodifacoum, a slow-acting anticoagulant used in island eradications worldwide. The pellets were tinted blue-green, waxed to resist rain, and mixed to appeal to rats and mice, but still lethal to any rabbits left alive. 2 rounds of drops, spaced weeks apart, made sure every gully, ledge, and ridge was hit at least twice. If rain washed pellets off a slope, the next drop covered it again. The scale was enormous. Across the island, helicopters spread roughly 305 metric tons of bait. That's about 336 short tons, or nearly 672,000 pounds. 4 AS-350 helicopters handled the entire load. By early July of that winter, the last run was complete. Once the bait was down, the next battle was keeping it from doing new harm. Brodifacoum is potent and lingers. If a scavenger eats a poisoned carcass, the toxin can climb the food chain. Crews patrolled riverbanks and beaches on foot, collecting dead rabbits and logging every find. It was soaking wet, freezing, often in sleet, but it saved countless birds. Later studies on giant petrels, the big carrion eaters of the south, confirmed that while some died, their overall numbers had room to rebound. The population recovered in the years that followed. Meanwhile, the island was turned into a massive checkerboard of search lines. Rangers and pilots had to cover every route again and again, looking for missed spots, stray bait, or any new signs of animals. They pushed through knee-deep bog, fought winds that shoved them sideways, and climbed ridges that turned to slippery mud every time it rained. Still, every pass they made and every clean stretch they checked helped prove one thing: the bait had reached everywhere, and there were no hidden pockets left untouched. Then came the hardest, slowest part: the ground search. Once the helicopter baiting was done, the island was split into sections, and dog teams began working through each one, step by step. The lineup was carefully chosen. Springer Spaniels were used for their energy and long-range sweeps. Labradors handled the steady, detailed searching, and one small terrier mix was brought in for the tight burrows. Later on, 3 trained rodent detection dogs came from New Zealand to look for any remaining rats or mice. Before they started, every dog was trained around penguins so that the sight, noise, or smell of thousands of birds wouldn't throw them off. Then the real work began. They searched in every kind of weather the island could throw at them. Rain, hail, fog, and mud so deep it could pull a boot off your foot. Over the next 13 months, those teams crossed and recrossed Macquarie twice, covering more than 90,000 kilometers, about 55,000 miles, all on foot. They slept in tents, ate cold food, and kept going no matter how rough it got. The dogs didn't care about the terrain or the weather, they only cared about the scent. A single dropping was enough to make a spaniel swing its head and zigzag until it locked in on a trail. At first there were a few finds, faint tracks, old burrows, and the odd carcass. But as the months passed, the signs grew rarer. In that first season after baiting, they found just a handful of living rabbits, only 8 adults and 1 litter of kittens. Everyone mattered because a single pregnant rabbit could restart the entire infestation and undo millions of dollars and years of work. One story from that final sweep still stands out. A handler named Melissa Houghton was working a black Labrador called Wags along a remote slope. The dog suddenly froze, tail low, nose to the ground, and began tracking uphill. Moments later, Wags stopped and signaled. Hidden under thick grass was a rabbit doe with her young, the last breeding den on the entire island. Clearing that nest was a small, quiet victory, but it sealed the success of the whole mission. Behind all those big moments was a mountain of paperwork just as serious as the search itself. Every single thing was written down, every track found, every false alarm, every hour spent in the field. If one area showed even a small sign like droppings or scent, the team went back and searched it again. Only after several clean checks in a row could they finally mark a block as clear. That careful system mattered more than any piece of technology. It was the difference between guessing the island was pest-free and knowing for sure. While all that work continued on the ground, the managers kept watch over the other half of the island, the birds. The big baiting runs had been done in winter, when most seabirds were far out at sea. Crews still walked the beaches to collect any carcasses they found, just to stop scavenger birds from eating poisoned remains. And because the rabbit virus had already wiped out most of the rabbits earlier, there weren't many bodies left for them to find in the first place. By the end of that 2011 winter, the island had gone quiet. No scratching in the grass, no new burrows on the hillsides, nothing. The last known rabbits were gone. But the team didn't relax. For the next few years, they kept searching. The rodent detection dogs were sent out again, this time to the huts, the beaches, and the open ridges inland. If the wind or tide carried a strange smell into a valley, handlers followed it right away. 2 full years passed with no new signs. That's the world standard for island recovery. 2 quiet years before anyone can officially say pest-free. Macquarie reached that mark. In early April of 2014, 7 years after the project began, the island was officially declared free of rabbits, rats, and mice. It was the largest multi-species island eradication ever completed anywhere on Earth. So how did Macquarie Island respond? The return of the lost island. When the pressure finally lifted, the island started to breathe again. For the first time in hundreds of years, the ground wasn't being eaten or dug apart. Slopes that had looked scraped and lifeless began turning green again. The huge plants that once made Macquarie famous, those big-leaf megaherbs, started growing back everywhere. Thick tussock grass formed tight clumps that held the hills together. The Macquarie cabbage has huge, round leaves that catch mist and protect small seedlings under them. Chlorophyllum grows in tight, low clumps that hang on even in gales. When they cover an entire slope together, they act like a living blanket that slows down rain, holds water in, and keeps the soil from sliding away. That's why seeing them return was such a big deal. They're the anchors that keep the island in place. As the plants came back, the birds followed. Burrow-nesting petrels need soft soil and thick plants to keep their tunnels from collapsing. When the slopes were bare, heavy rain destroyed their nests every year. But once the grass and herbs grew back, their success shot up. White-headed petrels started nesting more often. Blue petrels and gray petrels, birds that had completely disappeared from the main island, came back and multiplied fast. Studies showed blue petrels increasing by about 14% each year, and gray petrels by about 10%. That's huge for seabirds that live long lives and raise only 1 chick at a time. They return to the best slopes first, dry, steep areas near the ridges where their burrows stay dry and open to the air. At night, you can hear the difference. Petrels now fill the sky again, gliding in from the sea and diving into their burrows. The penguins tell the same story. Royal penguins don't dig, they nest right on the surface. When the plants are healthy, the rookeries sit on a mat of roots instead of bare mud. That gives chicks firm ground to stand on when storms roll in. King penguins also rely on plants. The tussock grass around the edges of their colonies breaks the wind, slows down mudslides, and keeps the ground stable. When the slopes are green, chicks have a solid place to grow. Now that the balance is back, keeping it that way is a full-time job. Macquarie is one of the most isolated places on Earth, and everything that goes there, food, fuel, gear, has to come through a strict biosecurity chain. In Hobart, the Australian Antarctic Division runs a cargo and biosecurity center that checks every crate and pallet before it leaves. Nothing is trusted until it's cleaned, inspected, and sealed. Every box is opened, every piece of foam or packing material examined. If inspectors find seeds, dirt, or even the faintest sign of rodent droppings, that shipment doesn't move. They use pest control sprays, fogging, and rodent detection dogs trained to sniff out trouble before it ever reaches the ship. The goal is to keep new pests from ever touching the island again. The same rules apply to people. Everyone, scientists, workers, and visitors, follows strict check, clean, dry rules. Velcro is pulled open and vacuumed. Pockets and cuffs are checked. Boots are scrubbed and dried so no mud or seeds get carried south. It might sound extreme, but one single seed or bug could start the next invasion. Every jacket, bag, and camera goes through the same routine. The protection doesn't stop when the ship leaves. On the island, there are traps set at storage areas and beaches. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.